Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off, and we want to look at adding borders to things. Now, one of the things that you might be experiencing is if you had a square image and you didn't have this little radius of, or excuse me, this little circle of background showing, and you want to add a more significant border, then what you can do is you can actually go, I'm going to right click my image and inspect it. And you can actually add what's called a border to it. And so we've got border radius at 50% and background color and so forth. But I can also add a property called border. And again, like if I wanted to have border left, border top, border right, and so on, I could. Those are longhand. But I want the border to be the same all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and just say border. And border takes 3 different values always. It has to have all 3. And it doesn't matter what order they go in, but in shorthand, we want to tell it for sure how fat it's supposed to be. So we'll say it's like let's start with 1 pixel. All right, and it doesn't really work in percentage so well for border. So if you say like 1 pixel, and then the next value would be the color, let's say. So let's do white again. And then the next value would be what type of border is it? Is it solid? Is it dotted? And there are specific types, and you can see that if I wanted to pick something, it's trying to give me a color, but I know that I want to tell it to be solid. And then it added some border to it. Now I can see dramatic changes if I say add a 5 pixel border, a 10 pixel border, and so forth. I think that's ridiculous looking. So I'm going to leave it back down to 1 pixel, and I could leave the border off completely if I wanted, but just so you can see how to add how to add a border to your image, that's how you could do it. The other thing that I could do too is instead, if I wanted to have a double color, instead of having white, I could do something like black. And you can see how that looks, right? And I don't necessarily love the way that looks, but you can get a sense of how you could do something like that. And we could do like, a CCC for gray so that it sort of fades off the edge or whatever. You're welcome to do however you want. I'll leave mine white, and I will leave it as a 1 pixel. All right, so you can make adjustments however you need. Okay, so that's how you add a border to something. Now I'm going to just copy this, and I want to also add the border to the bottom of my banner as well. So let's select banner, and then here we can just add border. And except I don't want it to be all the way around. See how it's adding it to the left side and the right side and then to the top of the banner? Well, I don't want that. So all we have to do here is say border and change this from shorthand to longhand, border dash bottom, like that. And then you see it only goes to the bottom. The other thing I don't really want to happen is I don't want it to just be 1 pixel. I think that it might be better if it's about 3 pixels so that it starts to mimic the, sort of a consistent size, okay? And then if I'm gonna do that, then I should do the same thing here, let's copy this whole deal. I copy that, and I would wanna do the same thing definitely down in the footer. So if I right click and inspect the element here, I can find the footer tag on my left in the HTML view, and then it pulls up the CSS for me. And I'm going to paste that rule in, except I don't want the border to be on the bottom of the footer. I want it to be on the top. So I can change that. And you see it goes ahead and it adds that for me. And then again, I can do something similar with the articles as well. So let's go up and find the articles. I'm just going to pick one of the articles that's inside of the content area. Oops. And then I'm going to add a new rule. And this one, I do want the borders to be all the way around, so I am going to change it back to shorthand. And I think that 3 pixels is probably going to be maybe a little bit heavy for these, even though it's consistent. I might want to bump that down to like maybe 2 pixels. That's really up to you. And the other thing that I'm finding that's really distracting is that I still have a white background set for the actual section content banner, or not banner, but the content section. So I'm going to change that by selecting section whose ID is content, and I'm going to disable that white background, okay? And I just want to show you, you can see here how that's rendering, and I want to show you, if I were to jump over here to sources, I want to show you how that is rendering out in the actual CSS. See where I changed section content and I disabled background? What it did was it put comments around it. So I know that I don't ever want that to be white in mine. You might feel differently. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And then when I jump back over to elements, you see that it's actually gone. It's not just disabled, it's gone. Okay, so that's one way of seeing it. Okay, now there's still something else that I want to look at. Let's look at the other example, and you see that we've got some text shadows in places that kind of work with this other drop shadow. That's kind of nice. So let's figure out how to add that. Over in CSS-tricks, there's another great tutorial on that explains how text shadow works. So and I'm not worrying about applying multiple shadows, but the actual property name is text-shadow, and it tells you what the different positions are. So the first value in text shadow is going to be the X coordinate. The second one is the Y coordinate. The value is the blur radius. This one doesn't have a spread the way that box shadow did. So instead of having 5 values, here we've just got 4. We've got X, Y, blur, and then the color of the shadow. All right, so it's a little different than the last one. It's a little simpler. So if we want to go and say that everything inside of the banner is going to have a text shadow, we can do that. So let's scroll up here and let's find our banner. Okay, and then we can, in the styles here, I'm going to make this come up a little bit. And if I apply it to the banner, it's going to apply to all the text that's in the banner. Okay, it cascades down. That's why it's called cascading style sheets, right? So I can say text dash shadow, all right, and then the colon, and then we said X, Y, blur, and then color, right? So we can do, like I said 0, I like 0 for X, okay, and then for Y, I'm gonna do, let's just do 3 pixels or so. And then you see automatically it starts to duplicate it. So that's the way it's blurring, because right now I don't have a blur value. And so I'm going to blur it, let's say about 3 pixels. And then now we need to tell it what color we want to use to blur it. Now we could, like I said before, do something like 0, 0, 0. That's very, very dark. That's black, right? If you want it not to be so black, but you want it to actually be able to see through to some of the color that's below it, then we can use RGBA again. All right, and inside of the parentheses, we'll do 0, 0, 0 for red, green, blue, and then comma, and then for the alpha transparency, let's do 0.5 again to sort of match the level of shadow that all the other stuff has. Okay, so that looks kind of nice, and I'm happy with that. And you can adjust this and play with it until you're happy with it. I'm going to copy that text shadow so I don't have to type everything out again. And I'm going to apply that down my footer as well, all right? Because my footer, I think, if you look down in the footer, we kind of want that to be similar because it's in the header and it's in the footer, right? We don't have to have the text shadow everywhere, though. In fact, you probably don't want it. You don't want it everywhere. You definitely don't want it like on body copy and stuff, right? But that works okay. And it might not work so well on these links, but we also haven't changed the color of these links yet. You don't want to leave them the way that they are, but we haven't gotten to that just yet. Okay, so let's scroll back up, and there was something that I noticed that we want to take a look at. See how this has a space underneath it? Well, we didn't put that there, and it just happened. And in fact, you might notice that a lot of things kind of have spread out spacing. And one of the things that's happening is that user agent style sheets are being applied, and some rules are being applied that we really kind of don't want. And so if I right click and inspect this element, it's going to take me up here to the list. And if I look at nav, for instance, all I see is blue. I don't see anything that shows padding or margins. As soon as I hover over UL, though, see how above and below it, it turns orange? Well, if you remember, down here it says that orange is a margin. So that means that even though we told the nav UL to have 0 padding, we didn't tell it to have 0 margin. So either we could get rid of the margin, or something else that we could do is think about doing like a little bit of a reset for the whole page on certain elements. And normally, you know, whenever you get into sort of more advanced stuff, and I don't mean advanced like it's advanced, I just mean more advanced than the first time you style something. You use a thing called a reset, and it wipes out all the user agent styles so that you can start from scratch. And instead of fighting against old styles, you're actually intentionally applying all of your own styles. So, but we're not using one of those resets. We're actually allowing some of the user agent styling to kick in. But there's some things that I think would be really helpful to get rid of. And one of the things that we can do is create an element style. And what I'm going to do before I actually create this element style is I'm going to save the stuff that I've done already. So if I jump over here to sources, I'm going to go into my styles, select everything, copy it, and I'm going to jump back into Komodo in my style sheet, select all, and then paste it so I'm overwriting it. And then I'll save this. And then that way I don't accidentally lose my styling over in my browser. So if I come up here and hit refresh, then everything should still look the same. I should still have all of my drop shadows and borders. All right, so we're good to go. And now what I need to do is go back to elements, and I'm going to create a new style by clicking on this little button, this little plus symbol. And I'm going to show you how to use a grouped rule. And so what we'll do here is I'm going to type, let's do it for section, for all instances of section. And if I put a comma and a space, then I don't have to have the space, but a comma at least. And let's do it for every H1, comma H2, comma H3, H4, all the way down to H5 and H6. Might as well include those as well, just in case we use them, even though they're not on the page. Let's do it for paragraphs. So P selector, let's do it for UL, comma OL, comma DL for definition list, because we do have one of those on the page. Let's also do it for block quote. Yeah, let's just stop at that, okay? And then what we're going to do is for all of these things, we're going to tell it to have margin 0 and auto, so that it automatically at least will try to center stuff, but it'll have a 0 margin on the top and bottom. So I'm going to create that rule, but the thing is that I don't want that to create problems for me in other places, so I need to be selective about where I place that rule. And before I go and find it, you'll notice that it got rid of that space down there. It also collapsed the margin that was below my H1 so that these are closer together, which I actually kind of like. And it also collapsed a lot of this stuff, which I don't necessarily love, but we can always go back and intentionally style it. And then it also changed my block quote so that the block quote no longer is inset. So there might be some things that maybe you don't want to include in there. Like if you liked the way the block quote was, then if you just remove the block quote from here, then it will undo that and it allows the user agent styling to apply. But anyway, so we're going to go over to sources, and you see it jumps straight to that inspector style sheet. I'm going to copy this rule, and I'm going to go back into Komodo. And this is important. I don't want that to be loaded at the end of the page. And that's basically what's happening in my Google Chrome Inspector. I want it to be loaded up at the beginning of the page so that it literally will reset stuff in the beginning, and then if I override it later to apply my own special rules, it'll work. So I'm going to paste that right after the body tag. Okay, and then save that. And then let's come back over here now and let's hit the refresh button. And you can see that it did adjust my page, but that at the same time it also is still allowing me to have margins where I wanted to actually have margins. Okay, so so that's something I think is really useful to understand.